1250 WTMA.
Now, here's more of the TMA Morning Show with Charlie James.
18 minutes past 8 o'clock on the Big Talker 1250 WTMA, WTMA.com. One of the great traditions of Charleston is Piccolo Spoleto. And with us this morning, we've got Jay White and Jim Algar. And you guys are going to be in a play during Piccolo Spoleto, and it's called Why is Rock and Roll? So answer the question, Jay. Why is rock and roll?
Why is rock and roll? Well, Jim, what's the word you use for the play?
Well, it's infotainment.
Infotainment, yes. Absolutely.
Yes, to answer your question as far as why is rock and roll, well, we obviously use the show to kind of explain why this music, why did it come about. There's lots of different aspects that put it together, but one of them obviously being the baby boomer generation, and have an audience for it. We talk about the importance of the electric guitar and what once that was the truly electrified instrument, first real electrified instrument that could chord and play single notes and such. Right. It basically would create these genres that split from rock and roll into folk rock, country rock, funk rock, all these different things. And so rock became an adjective for music.
Where did that come from? I know, what was the DJ's name? Alan Freed.
Alan Freed, yeah.
We discuss him in the
coined the phrase rock and roll, right?
He did, absolutely.
Right. And he also put on one of the first rock and roll sort of festivals or shows or something where there was a riot, and so rock and roll got off to a fast start.
Yeah,
it's actually why the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is in Cleveland, because that's where he was. And the whole element of that was basically there was a record store owner in Cleveland who wanted to sell these records, and so you start talking about it, like, well, what do you want to call it?
Yeah.
So at the time, it was just something that we didn't have a name for it, so we just started. We'll call it rock and roll, which is a euphemism for like many blues songs with something having to do with rocking and rolling kind of thing. And so it always had that air of shall we say danger to it.
Right. And so what the story, the kind of play, if you will, we take it chronologically, and so we will talk to the audience, almost like a TED Talk, just straight to the audience.
Oh, okay.
And then we'll put on wigs and jackets, play some of the parts, and play a lot of the music, pieces of over 40 songs, that spans it. And so it tells a lot of individual stories, and people know the characters. I mean, you're going to know Chuck Berry, you're going to know Elvis, and so. But you start to see, when you put these 30 years together, it makes one big story with some ups and downs, and it's fun.
All right, so we all know the names. Or maybe we don't know all of the names.
Right.
When we are talking about rock and roll. Elvis Presley, known as the king of rock. But who was the founder of rock and roll?
Well, truly the founder, it's interesting because Elvis was really the person that people like, okay, this is who we're going to back, so to speak. But if you want to look at the template, it's Chuck Berry. Chuck Berry is basically the main songwriter, making the electric guitar so prominent. And we talk about this in the show. But basically, Chuck Berry was such a phenomenal guitar player that he was, nobody could play like him. And he was writing these songs that, were speaking to the baby boomer teenagers, cars, going to school to dance, these all of these types of things that basically was speaking right to this element. We do talk about this in the play, but Chuck Berry's first hit, Maybelline, Elvis would do that song every time he performed. So very quickly it became a standard in the sense where one of the classic stories of Chuck Berry is that he would never tour with a band. He would just show up and there would be musicians there. And if you didn't know how to play Chuck Berry music, you couldn't play rock and roll. It was that simple.
Right. Now, we can go back in history and find the actual first blues note that was played during a jazz song.
Okay.
Can we kind of do that with rock and roll and find out what was the first rock and roll song?
Well, one of the things we talk about is rock and roll kind of it kind of formed from four different regional types of music. So you have the blues, bluegrass, country western, and folk, and so you mash those together. And you can see where, like Maybelline, for instance, is kind of blues meeting country western.
Right,
yeah.
But to answer your question, Charlie, the first Rocket 88 is known as the first rock and roll song. And basically, for all intents and purposes, it's a blues song that was sped up. So rock and roll just has this urgency. Blues, not to say that blues wasn't played fast, but it was just something where there's just this wild abandon. And that's really what we try to explain in the sense of, rock and roll ultimately became rock. And then rock has become, as I said before, an adjective where what does rock mean? what does it really mean? Well, it means attitude, it means volume, it means, just these things that aren't explained, but we attach it to different genres where, well, he's jumping around on stage, so that's some kind of rock thing.
So one of the things we actually talk about is where we drop the end roll. So it just becomes rock music. Because
it's like what country did with and Western.
Right.
They dropped
Exactly.
So what? So give us a little insight into that. When did they drop the and roll?
Oh, you have to pay for tickets.
That will be revealed, ladies and gentlemen. All right. Well, you guys talk about, and really the electric guitar,
correct,
came in and started rock and roll,
right?
Well, that's actually interesting. It's the solid body electric guitar.
Okay, all right.
So the electric guitar had been around, but what was happening, big band, which was popular at the time, big band, they were playing these what are called hollow body guitars. So they're acoustic, and as the volume would increase, the volume would become so loud that it would make the top of the guitar vibrate. And so it was a constant problem. And so
it would feedback.
Yeah, it was feedback. And once the solid body, suddenly it was, okay, well, now it doesn't feed back anymore. And then in addition to that, well, let's turn up the amps louder. Let's make them even louder and louder and louder to the point where the volumes got so high, which is when you drop the in roll, is that there was just the volume was going through this solid block of wood, and new feedback was coming because, if you want a classic, The Who, Pete Townsend, the reason that he has lost his hearing was bleeding so loud. And you have these speakers that are as tall as he is blaring at him full volume.
So, which was the most influential guitar, Gibson or Fender?
Fender.
Really?
The Fender Stratocaster, which we talk about in the play, is the most copied, the most played, and the most well-known instrument, electric guitar in the world. Fender Instruments is the largest manufacturer of instruments in the world. Basically, that shape of a guitar would be it's an icon in the sense where you can tell what it is. Similar to the Coke bottle, where a blind person can tell. I know what this is.
It's funny. Leo Fender was not a guitar player.
Right.
He wasn't a guitar player. He fixed sound systems. Or
he was fixing the PA systems and building speaker boxes. And so when these guys were coming in with their jazz box guitars and complaining about it, then we'll just have a solid body guitar.
I got an idea.
Exactly.
Why don't we try this?
Now, you mentioned Gibson earlier, of course. Well, originally the play was about 9 hours long, so we have condensed it down. We have to some people out. Condensed it down now to about an hour and a half. But the point being that a gentleman named Les Paul, he was trying to fix this problem for a very long time, and he went to Gibson, and he had kind of created this thing that he made out of a railroad tie and put two pickups on it. It called it the log. It was just a long stick, and basically played it at a gig, and no one knew what it was. So he went back to his house. He cut the top and the bottom off of a hollow body guitar and connected it to this log,
just to make it look like a guitar.
So he took it back, and it didn't feed back. He'd solve that problem. But basically, then hey, this is a prototype. So he took it to Gibson, and they were the biggest manufacturers at the time, and said, "I've solved the feedback problem. This is what we need to do." And so they kind of laughed at him and threw him out. But basically, that instrument is now in the Smithsonian. And basically, once Fender started making these solid body guitars and everybody started buying them, Gibson was like, "Go find the guy with the broomstick with the pickups on. We need him." And so that's why it's called a Les Paul, because everything was leveraged on Les Paul. You will play this guitar. You will represent this guitar. We will put your name on it. So it's a Gibson Les Paul, but that's why it's called that.
So, I mean, you've seen, of course, the effect of, we had the British Revolution and the British invasion back in the 60s. You guys cover that part of rock and roll?
We talk about the Beatles, and mainly something, if you talk about classical music, first thing comes to mind, Beethoven, Mozart, everybody knows these names. So our kind of philosophy was, okay, in 200 years, who are we going to talk about with rock and roll? You're going to talk about Elvis, you're going to talk about the Beatles, you're going to talk about Bob Dylan, you're going to talk about these different names, and of course, it all kind of extrapolates from that. But it's really just fascinating to see that, all of these names that, going back to Elvis, I mean, Elvis, the most interesting thing to me is that Elvis is impersonated throughout his life. There are impersonators who do the 50s Elvis. There are impersonators who do the Vegas Elvis. I mean, there's so many. And actually, one of the interesting things that I in doing research for the play, there was a movie called Honeymoon in Vegas, had Nicolas Cage's comedy. But in the movie, there's a 6-year-old dancing around. He's doing an Elvis impersonation. And he's there in Vegas. And that 6-year-old in that movie is Bruno Mars. And so it is. And to this day, you can see when he was on the Super Bowl, he's got the gold jacket on. You can see this when Michael Jackson did his famous moonwalk. There's something, if you look at early Elvis, he has white socks on and short pants and black shoes. So Michael Jackson does that. If you see Bruno Mars, he does that. And so it's all these things that have all kind of been done before, and it's not so much as a tip of the hat more than like, this is how it's done. And so it's really interesting to see this template that was laid out, and then how everyone kind of follows it because it works.
So is rock and roll they say it's uniquely American. Is that true, or you're finding?
It's
a blend,
because
right?
it's a blend because the Beatles the Beatles were, and they admitted this. We're just repackaging American music and selling it back to America.
Yeah.
Because they were listening to all the same stuff. They were listening to the Isley Brothers and Elvis and Bob Dylan and so it was happening there and here and again with two British invasions, the Beatles being one, and then like the Who and the Doors.
Right.
It was there's several moments where it kind of crossed, and you take somebody like Jimi Hendrix too. That was an American that was taken to England.
Yeah.
And packaged there and then sold back to America.
Sold back to us, yeah.
So, and that's really the thing with talking about being uniquely American. It's obviously started here, but the Beatles elevated rock and roll to art, and then it became really a world music in the sense where now, okay, well, this is Brazilian rock. I don't know what this is, but it's rock and it's in Brazil, or this is South African rock. It has that element to it where it's not truly defined, and yet rock just seems to be the thing we can throw and call it that.
All right, we're talking with Jay White and Jim Algar. They've got a play. It is called Why Rock and Roll? And it's going to be Why is Rock and Roll? So you guys going to be at Piccolo Spoleto. That starts 1 week from today. Piccolo Spoleto is going to be a lot of events. If you want more information or details about all of the events, and we've got a bunch of them here in Charleston, you can go to PiccoloSpoleto.com, click on the calendar, and find out. Guys, I could sit here and talk guitars with you.
We got 9 hours.
All day long. So everybody get out there and check out the show, all the details. And guys, we appreciate you being on the program. Thank you very much. Piccolo Spoleto. It is 8:29 at the Big Talker, 1250 WTMA. Good morning.